So, around the time of the sixth season of Star Trek The Next Generation, the decision was made that the seventh season would be its final one. Now, at the time, this raised an outcry from a lot of people. The show was a critical darling. The fans loved it. It was nothing short of genre redefining. It had re-energized Trek for the next generation. But as any sci-fi fan who has sat through the umpteenth season of Supernatural knows, in hindsight, it was the best idea. It's good to end these things when you're on top, as opposed to stretching the story so far you can see through it. But the fans were placated with the additional news that Patrick Stewart and the crew of the Enterprise D was going to graduate to the silver screen. They were going to take up the mantle left by the original series and carry the Trek franchise on for the next 20-some movies. It was also decided that that first film in the what was considered the next generation of films would be something the fans had been dying for ever since the Next Generation first appeared. They were going to do a full crew crossover. The original series was going to meet the Next Generation. This is the thing that had been teased and thought about for years. I mean, they even did several episodes about it. DeForest Kelley guest starred on the very first episode of the Next Generation. It's the best scene in the entire 2 hours, by the way. Leonard Nimoy had done a two-parter, which was excellent. James Doohan had returned as Scotty for an episode, which again was excellent. So they'd done those little crossovers, but the fans were aching for both crews to interact, and most of all, that big question, the golden apple, the brass ring for Captain Kirk and Captain Picard to finally meet. Again, all of this seemed like a no-brainer. All the pieces were there. And it was going to be the film event of the Trekkie world. And sadly, that really didn't happen. The subsequent film, Star Trek Generations, is not great. I'm just going to have to say it. I've said it at the beginning of these, that none of these movies, none of these Trek films are actually bad. I wouldn't call this a bad movie. But I'm going to have to use this word, and I don't want to use it, but I'm going to have to. I think of the Trek films, the original timeline Trek films, I do think it's the worst. And it pains me to say that. I remember when this came out, boy, I was a mark. I was a Trek mark. And I was ready, and I made excuses and apologized for this movie for years. And I hadn't seen it in years until the other day when I watched it for the purpose of this review. And hindsight being what it is, I have to say it is, of the original timeline Trek films, it is the worst. Not bad, but definitely not everything that we had hoped it would be upon its premiere. So what happened? What happened, and why does this movie not hold up the way it should? Well, let's talk about it. So before we get into that, let's talk about what is the story of this film. Well, the story focuses on Magic Space MacGuffin number 42. This time a ribbon of energy that floats through space called the Nexus. And the Nexus is this temporal, timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly kind of thing where if you fall into it, it's like being inside of happiness. Your greatest dream, your most happy memory, everything you ever wanted, you get. And you can stay there forever and never die. Long story short. During a rescue mission on the newly christened Enterprise B, Kirk is lost into the Nexus and presumed dead. Flash forward 78 years, and the crew of the Enterprise D encounters a mad scientist by the name of, I'm going to mispronounce it now, Saren, played by Malcolm McDowell, who is desperate to return to the Nexus and doesn't care if he has to blow up planets to do it. Space shit happens. Picard is lost in the Nexus. He finds Captain Kirk. They team up to go back and stop Saren from being evil. Kirk is killed in the ensuing battle, and the torch is officially passed to the next generation. So, there is a lot going on there. And at the same time, it feels like not much. So, where does this film break down? Well, in rewatching it, I find it interesting. I think that the major problem with this film is spoken by one of its characters. It's weird how that happens sometimes. Malcolm McDowell's big catchphrase in this one is, they say time is the fire in which we burn. And he has this great villain monologue about, you know, time is a predator. It's tracking you down. It's stalking you. And you can try to outrun it with doctor and medicine and all this, but eventually time is going to hunt you down and make the kill. And I can't help but wonder now in retrospect if that wasn't the writers of the film expressing certain anxieties that they were having within the film itself. Time, I believe, is the enemy of this film. I think it is the reason for a lot of its ill will. And to really get into that, we have to go back in time. Now, I'm going to tell you as much as I remember from being there in the mid-90s when all this was going down. You got to remember, first of all, this is 20-some years ago, so my memory is not perfect. And secondly, this is before the internet became the internet. You know, the internet was kind of there, but not really. And most of the rumors and stuff you heard, you got from fan magazines or conventions or whatever. So, with that in mind, let's try to piece together the timeline of Star Trek Generations. So as I said, the original concept was that they were going to do a full crew crossover. They wanted to get the entire original cast back to team up with the cast of the Next Generation. Great, awesome, everyone's on board. And then things started happening. This person pulled out, that person pulled out. This person didn't want to do it. That person didn't have the time. This person wanted more money. But one by one, the crew of the original show said, no thank you. Again, sometimes it was scheduling, sometimes it was money, sometimes it was health. I know DeForest Kelley was not in a great place at this time. Had he passed away by then? I don't think so. I think he was still alive, but he wasn't in good health. So, okay, so we can't do a full crew crossover. But if we can keep Kirk, if we can keep him, that's what the fans really want to see, is Kirk and Picard. That's the money. And again, it all makes sense. That is a great thing to hang your film on. You know, this is a event worthy of a movie. Come see the two captains team up. Okay, great. So all of this happens, and again, I'm speaking of rumor and innuendo. Don't know how much of this is true, but of course, one of the great rumors about William Shatner is that he's a bit unreasonable. He's a little demanding. And there were rumors of problems with the script and him not liking this and him not liking that, and the Next Generation crew not liking this and not liking that. Again, if you watch any of the special features, of course they're all going, oh no, it was great, everybody was so happy. I don't think I believe that. I don't know what to believe, but the simple fact that you can't escape is that the script that was constantly being changed and altered and rewritten to fit whoever was there is not the story that they originally started out with. That is painfully clear. And all the while these demands are being met, these people are dropping out, the release date is coming. Okay? So the film that they eventually put out, it feels rushed. It feels like something that was slapped together, in terms of the story, slapped together very quickly to meet that release date. Done with the best of intentions. When you look at this film, it's earnest. It has its heart in the right place, but the problem is the story and all that, it just doesn't hang together, because it feels like an assignment that you just realized was due tomorrow when you thought you had 2 months to do it. So there's the big problem hanging over it. Time comes into it in another way when you consider, again, that release date. Let's think of it in terms of the two shows themselves. When Star Trek went off the air in 1969 and was kept alive through syndication and fan dedication and whatnot and what have you. So when it was brought back in 1979, it was a fucking event. I know I didn't cover the motion picture on this show, but that is part of why I feel the motion picture turned out the way it did, is they were trying to really give the fans a big spectacle, something to reward them for the 10 years of dedication. So the act of getting the crew back together, of going back to the Enterprise, it was something exciting for the people. Okay? Fans of The Next Generation, their movie was out that summer. Their show ended in 94. It was out the summer of 94. There was no downtime. So much so that even their series finale didn't really have the feel of a series finale, because everybody knew this wasn't the end. We were going to see them in the movie. So, ironically, a lot of that, and that is really what this movie turned out to be. This turns out to be more of a series finale than the actual series finale. And I think that's part of the problem. I can't help but wonder, in the magical what if part of my brain, what if they had chosen to wait a year? What if they had chosen to wait 2-3 years? Let The Next Generation settle. Think of how much anticipation there was for Star Trek Picard, because of how long he'd been gone, how long we had not seen Picard. So even the parts of the show that didn't work out, you still didn't care because it's fucking Picard. I think if they had moved the show, moved the release date, gotten a better script that better fit the cast, and let us miss them, and have the movie be exactly what the original movie was, them coming back together. Worf could have still gone to Deep Space Nine. Maybe the other crew members had been reassigned by that point, and now they all have to come back to the Enterprise for this, whatever this big mission is. The other side of this coin is that with the 10-year hiatus between the original series ending and their show coming out, the creators knew, and I mentioned this in the Wrath of Khan review, is that they had to basically start over. They wanted to keep the continuity. The characters were still the characters. Everything that happened on the show still happened. But they knew they had to kind of start fresh. They had to get new fans involved, because at the time, Trek fandom was rabid, but it was not a huge audience. they had to like get new people interested. And as I mentioned in the Wrath of Khan, that was kind of the challenge that faced them. They, even with the stuff in Wrath of Khan that was old, you know, Khan himself and that whole episode, it was still presented in such a way that any audience member could come in, see it, and immediately know what was going on. They didn't have to be told, this is who this is, and this is who that is, and this is who this is. This film doesn't seem to care about that. This film pretty much takes it for granted that if you're watching this movie, you clearly have already seen The Next Generation, and you know who all these people are, and you know what their journey is, and you know what their relationships are. So we don't need to take time to emphasize it. And I can understand where that point of view comes from. Trek was never as hot, never as popular, never as at the forefront of pop culture as it was at this time. The Next Generation went off the air with a bang. It had 2 spin-offs in DS9 and Voyager. Trek was everywhere. So I understand that thought process. But, unfortunately, what that means is that so many things in this movie are pieces from a larger whole that if you are a new fan, you have no idea what the connection is. 2 of the heavies in this are Lursa and B'Etor, the Doros sisters. Now, if you're a longtime watcher of Next Generation and the one episode of DS9 they were on, you know who they are, and you know their connection to Worf and Picard and all that. If not, you're probably going, who the fuck are the Doros sisters? One of the big plot points in this is Data finally puts in his emotion chip. Now, if you're a new fan, you can get what's going on there, but you're not as in tune to the journey that he'd been on throughout the 7 seasons. Not only that, what spawned him to do this is a misunderstanding on the holodeck where he pushes Dr. Crusher into the water thinking it was funny, which it was, but then everybody tells him it's not. So this one faux pas is now enough of a catalyst, enough of an inciting incident for him to go, oh, I can't make a blunder like that again. I must have my emotions. When, if you put it up against all of the other faux pas he's committed over the course of the 7 seasons, it's no worse than any of those. So why is this a big fucking deal? Again, another great one. And this is, I was happy to see this because he was one of my favorite characters, still is. Worf gets promoted. He's finally promoted to Lieutenant Commander, which the fans wanted to see happen for a long time. But, you know, if you're not a fan, it's well, why is that important? Now again, that's a minor thing, and these are minor things, really. But when you stack them all up together, it's a lot. It's a lot riding against you. You know, and in the end, it just makes the whole enterprise, no pun intended, just feel like that happened. One of the big selling points of this film was Kirk was going to die. They were going to kill Captain Kirk, which, again, the fans were furious about. By some accounts, William Shatner was mad about, but, you know, whatever. But it made sense. But, again, you can tell by the hasty rewrites that it wasn't the way he was meant to die. The way Kirk, I believe, and I have no proof of this, but if they had done the original story, I think it was going to be the two crews on their various ships, very much like it was in the final episode of The Next Generation, some time problem, you know, that they have to solve from both ends, and Kirk ends up sacrificing himself to close the wormhole or whatever, and dies in space on the bridge of his ship the way a captain should go. Here, he dies in a boring punch-up on an ugly planet with, I mean, Kirk Kirk was always a two-fisted gunslinger of a captain. Picard was never a fighter. He could, but he was never a let's get down and beat the shit out of people. He was a let's outthink people, let's out strategize them. And their final battle here is these two guys fighting Malcolm McDowell. It just falls flat. Ironically, so did Kirk. Badoom-ching, sorry. It's just very clear that whatever their original idea for this film was, this was not it. And this is what they were able to paste together, given the time constraints that they had and the people they still had committed to the project. Now, is this movie completely terrible? No, definitely not. There are some great things in this movie. The whole film was sold on Kirk and Picard finally meet. And while the final battle is a bit disappointing, Kirk and Picard finally coming together is not. It is a really great couple of scenes. The characters have great chemistry and the actors have great chemistry. And it's just wonderful to, as a fan, even now, it is wonderful to see those two characters interacting. It is like, oh my God, So those were really well done. There is a sequence in this. So I said a little while ago that this film feels more like a series finale than the actual series finale did. Because part of the climax of this movie is the Enterprise is involved in a space battle and gets its ass kicked. They're able to win, but the ship is damaged and is going to blow up, so they have to separate the saucer section and crash land. So they basically fuck up the Enterprise. The space battle and the ensuing crash landing are fucking awesome. Awesome filmmaking. Great moment in Trek history. Watching the crew of the Enterprise in the saucer section sail down and crash on this planet and skid along as they're shaking and the thing's blowing up around and people being tossed around. It's fucking phenomenal. I have no criticism about that sequence. It is mwah. I understand why they saved that for the movie, because you needed the budget and the time, and again, it's an event big enough that feels like it needs to be a movie. So, this, I'll also say Malcolm McDowell, though it feels like his character was vastly changed or hastily added in, or whatever. Malcolm McDowell is just a great villain. He plays a villain really great. He just has that look on his face. And he's fantastic in this role. I wish he was a villain with a better plan or a more interesting plan or something. But all in all, he's very good in it. But again, as I said, I can't help but wonder what would have happened had they waited 2 years, 3 years, given the show time to rest, given the fans time to breathe, time to miss them, and then brought them back in a much bigger event. Now, maybe if they'd done that, maybe they would have lost all of the original cast, instead of the 3 that agreed to do cameos. And maybe they would have, but maybe we would have gotten a better film out of it. Again, these are all what ifs and maybes. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas kind of thing. That's another thing, just real quick, the thing I gotta touch on, because I thought this was weird then and it's weird now. So Picard falls into the Nexus, and his ultimate happiness is to have a family and kids. He receives bad news about his family from the TV show. Again, if you didn't see the one episode of the show that his family was in, you'd have no clue what he was upset about. But they unfortunately die in a fire, and he's feeling alone. He's the last Picard. So his happiness in the Nexus is having a family. But it's not just having a family. It's like having a family from Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. Like, all the people are dressed in this Victorian era kind of garb. It's like, so so is this how you want the... Okay, whatever. Sorry, that's just something that popped in there. Again, I think this film had the problem that Star Trek 3 had. It tried to have a unifying theme. It tried to have a concept that was going on, but I think it became more of a checklist. We've got to get this, we've got to get this, we've got to get this. The end result is decent enough, but it's fairly weak. So, not the best outing, not the best maiden voyage for the Next Generation crew on the big screen. But the original cast first movie was not great. Matter of fact, it was so dull I didn't even cover it on this show. But then they came back with a second round knockout punch with Wrath of Khan. So the question is, can the Next Generation crew rebound from a disappointing first outing to create an outstanding science fiction adventure? In other words, can they assimilate to the big screen? And we're going to see what happens when they return with Star Trek First Contact. So, until then, my friends, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies, and make it so.